Taking over the investigation into Thursday's deadly knife attack at Paris police headquarters, France's anti-terrorism prosecutor says the assailant appeared to have embraced a radical form of Islam. Clashes break out once again in Baghdad after Iraqi authorities lift a curfew in the capital. Days of anti-government demonstrations have killed almost 100 people and fueled a political crisis. And defying a ban on face coverings and after another night of violence, masked pro-democracy protesters marched through Hong Kong, bringing the city to a tense standstill. Subway services have been suspended. Hello, and thank you for joining us in the France 24 newsroom. I'm Nadia Sharbi. Jean-François Ricard, France's anti-terrorism prosecutor, has been updating the press regarding the investigation into Thursday's knife attack at Paris police headquarters. Ricard gave more details as to the assailant's movements ahead of and during the attack, including the purchase of 2 knives just minutes before the assault that left 4 people dead. The charges against the man, who was shot dead at the scene, will be held as murder and attempted murder, affiliation with a terrorist organisation, and affiliation with a criminal organisation. Explaining the reason for the anti-terrorism unit taking over the investigation, the prosecutor pointed, among other elements, to 33 text messages exchanged between the assailant and his wife on the morning of the attack, all of them of a religious nature. Let's take a listen to a clip of Ricard's comments.
According to eyewitness statements also, the man is suspected to have been a Muslim who was part of a Salafist movement group. A number of eyewitness accounts are as follows. He approved of some activity carried out by the Salafist group. He has interesting or unusual behavior towards women. He approved of the terrorist attacks within Charlie Hebdo headquarters in 2015. And also, the man had given up wearing any form of Western clothing and only wore specific Muslim clothing when attending the mosque.
New anti-government protests have erupted again in the heart of the Iraqi capital this Saturday, with reports of gunfire and at least 8 people killed. Thousands of protesters have also taken to the streets in 2 southern cities and have reportedly set fire to political party offices. Now, this renewed unrest comes after Iraqi authorities lifted a round-the-clock curfew in Baghdad 2 days after it was imposed in the face of deadly violence. According to the latest figures, the death toll has reached almost 100 killed and over 4,000 injured. Peter O'Brien reports.
Heavy security in Baghdad as protests and gunfire break out again in the city despite a curfew being lifted.
The protesters are not carrying anything except for Iraqi flags. They are calling for the most basic of rights, employment and services.
The latest clashes follow the deadliest days so far in a week of demonstrations which have left dozens killed and thousands injured. Hundreds of arrests have been made and security forces have fired live rounds at protesters, even using snipers. The unrest began spontaneously over corruption, unemployment and poor public services, and is the worst since Iraq declared the defeat of the Islamic State group 2 years ago. It's shaken the year-old government of Adel Abdul Mahdi, who's promised reforms but defended the measures taken by security forces. On Friday, the powerful cleric Muqtada al-Sadr, who has a mass popular following and controls a large chunk of parliament, demanded the resignation of the government and a snap election.
After weeks of what Australia's foreign minister called very sensitive negotiations, Tehran has freed and dropped all charges against an Australian couple who spent more than 3 months in jail in Iran. The couple has now returned home to Perth. Here's a clip of the Australian minister's comments.
I'm pleased to be able to advise that the Iranian government has released Australian couple Jolie King and Mark Firkin from custody and has dropped the charges against them. For Jolie and for Mark, the ordeal that they have been through is now over. They are being united with their loved ones, which is a source of great relief and joy to everyone. I can tell you that they are in good health and in good spirits.
Well, following that move, a news agency in Iran reported that Australia had released an Iranian student who spent 13 months in detention over charges of exporting American military radar equipment to Iran. A very dark night. That's how a stony-faced Carrie Lam described the latest overnight clashes in Hong Kong. Speaking in a video statement issued this Saturday, the city's leader called on citizens to distance themselves from the more die-hard protesters who trashed dozens of underground stations, vandalised shops, set fires and blocked roads. But in renewed defiance, thousands more masked demonstrators took to the streets once again this Saturday, with lawmakers filing a petition to challenge the official ban on face coverings.
Police arrest a man after removing his mask, enforcing a new measure that came into effect on Saturday. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam imposed the mask ban using colonial-era emergency powers, which haven't been used in half a century. Lawmakers are bringing forward a legal challenge.
Now, this is a Henry VIII situation. This is basically, I say what is law, I say what applies, and I say when that ceases to be law. And that is not how our Constitution works, and that is not the separation of power, which is a very important principle, constitutional principle under the Basic Law and in the common law.
The move was intended to discourage protesters who wear masks to avoid recognition and protect against tear gas. Nevertheless, thousands of them marched on Saturday, still covering their faces, still calling for greater democratic freedoms and police accountability. It comes after another night of chaos, which left the subway suspended and many shops shuttered. Carrie Lam condemned the protesters for what she called a very dark night.
Extremely terrifying violence occurred in all districts of Hong Kong last night. The extreme actions carried out by masked rioters were shocking.
This week saw the worst violence in months of demonstrations, with 2 people hospitalised after being shot by police using live rounds.
Ecuador's transport unions have suspended a strike that has brought the country to a virtual standstill. The move comes after days of protests which saw riot police chase down demonstrators in the capital, Quito, and other major cities. Protesters reject government plans to slash fuel subsidies in the South American nation. Andrew Hillier reports.
Ecuador's transport strike may be over, but protesters are still determined to face down the police. The country's transport unions announced that they'd suspend the strike that had temporarily brought parts of Ecuador to a standstill, forcing the government to use military vehicles to get people from A to B.
For our part, we declare the end of the strike.
On the streets, however, protesters show no signs of backing down after days of running street battles sparked by the government's decision to end fuel subsidies. In the capital, Quito, on Friday, riot police fired round after round of tear gas to disperse groups of masked demonstrators. But they say they're staying put.
The government is intimidating the people. We have to fight.
We are the people. We are defending the people. Let's not give up.
President Lenin Moreno has responded by declaring a state of emergency and branding the protesters criminals. He insists he won't back down from his decision to end fuel subsidies that have been in place for decades as part of a belt-tightening austerity plan. But his proposals have sparked mass demonstrations that have resulted in more than 350 arrests.
Speaking to reporters this Saturday, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo defended the Trump administration's approach to Ukraine. This amid mounting efforts to impeach the US president over his dealings with his counterpart in Kiev. Pompeo criticized the impeachment inquiry as clearly political, but did not address Trump's stated desire for Ukraine to specifically investigate former Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter. A demand which impeachment investigators are focused on since a whistleblower complaint surfaced last month. The US Secretary of State did, however, accuse members of Congress of harassing his department to obtain documents linked to the investigation. Here's a clip of those comments.
We'll obviously do all the things we're required to do by law. I was a member of Congress once. Article 1 has a certain set of powers, and Article 2 has an obligation to make sure that we protect officials at the State Department. And sadly, there have been congressional inquiries that have harassed and abused State Department employees by contacting them directly and seeking to have them provide documents that belong to the State Department, that are official U.S. government records, and asking them to do so without saying, hey, don't bother calling the State Department lawyers, just talk to us directly. That's harassment, and I'll never let that happen to my team.
A military court in Cameroon has ordered the release of main opposition leader Maurice Kamto, along with 101 others this Saturday. This after a series of conciliatory gestures by veteran ruler Paul Biya. Kamto, who has now returned home, had been imprisoned for 9 months and was put on trial with 88 others in a military court in September on charges of insurrection, hostility to the motherland and rebellion, crimes which could carry the death penalty. Now, it's a model of citizen politics that has been tried and tested in Ireland and is now set to be applied here in France. A Citizens' Climate Convention is set to go into session, a chance for ordinary people from all walks of life to take on and debate climate change issues. James Wilson explains.
Last month, Grégoire Frati received an unusual message from the French government asking him if he wanted to take part in a citizens' convention on climate change.
I saw that it was a citizens' convention they organized. I was picked, and I agreed to do it.
Another 149 people will attend the convention. Participants have been carefully selected from all ages, all parts of the country, and all social classes, so that the assembly looks like France in 2019. Over 6 weekends, they'll learn from experts about the issues, debate the issues, and then come up with proposals to reduce carbon emissions.
I've created a Twitter account because I want to share with people what I'm doing. This is a way to directly communicate with people, listen to what they have to say, and for me to tell them what I'm up to.
The French Prime Minister came to open the assembly, promising participants that their ideas would be taken seriously.
You will draft your proposals into law, and if necessary, we will put them to a referendum.
For Grégoire, that's part of the attraction.
It's very important to us that it's passed by a national referendum. It means that what we're doing is truly important.
The Citizens' Climate Convention will submit its ideas to the government on the 26th of January next year.
And finally, a collection of Nazi objects seized in a police raid have gone on display at a Holocaust museum in Buenos Aires. The artifacts were discovered when police were searching a property belonging to an arts collector in the Argentinian capital. Many high-ranking Nazi officials fled to Argentina after the Second World War, but the country is also home to Latin America's largest Jewish population. Andrew Hillier has this report.
A reminder of humanity's darkest impulses. Busts of Adolf Hitler, a statue of a Germanic eagle, and an hourglass belonging to a member of the SS.
These artifacts show the power of the Nazis. They were so powerful, they could spend money on precious objects and take good care of them. They were fanatics.
The artifacts were seized when police swooped on an art collector's house in the capital, Buenos Aires. What they found was a room stuffed with more than 80 relics from the Nazi era. One of the more chilling objects, a game used to indoctrinate children with Nazi ideas. Proof that in Nazi Germany, not even the youngest could escape Hitler's iron grip on society.
These objects that were used in the past to foment hate, death and destruction will now be used to educate people on democratic values so that tragedies like the Holocaust don't happen again.
Thousands of Holocaust survivors fled to Argentina after the Second World War, leaving behind them the horrors of the concentration camps. But they weren't alone. Even though Argentina welcomed the victims of war, the relics show it also became the home of several high-ranking Nazi officials who escaped justice.
And on that, we leave this edition. Stay tuned to France 24. There's more coming up.
Special event.
I'm Arman Georgian in the capital of Tunisia, the country which gave the world the Arab Spring. And I'll be bringing you live coverage of the parliamentary election here. It's a vote which comes at a crucial moment in the country's democratic development. Join me for regular updates this Sunday, October the 6th, along with all the latest reactions and analysis here on France 24.
Watch events unfold on France 24 and France24.com.